As the night settles in, so can you. Let us know in the comments, where are you listening this and what is your current time. After that, close your eyes if you like. Nothing we're about to discuss is urgent or even particularly interesting. And let us begin. If you think the Vikings were just helmet-wearing hooligans swinging axes and grunting like extras in a bad fantasy film, it's time for a little Norse reality check. Sure, they could swing an axe, let's not kid ourselves, but the Viking Age, stretching roughly from 793 to 166 AD, was about more than just pillaging monasteries. It was a time of exploration, trade, and yes, a good bit of pillaging, but let's not put them in a one-dimensional box. First, let's set the stage. Scandinavia in this era wasn't exactly the land of milk and honey. We're talking about a place where the summer might give you a glorious 3 months of not freezing your socks off, if you were lucky. The cold, harsh climate meant that agriculture was a challenge, and feeding a family was about as easy as convincing a cat to take a bath. This lack of resources pushed the Norse to look beyond their fjords and mountains for survival. So, what do you do when your land isn't exactly a cornucopia of plenty? You set sail, of course. Economically, the Vikings were savvy. They were traders as much as they were raiders, and their longships were the SUVs of the sea, versatile, reliable, and able to take you on a cross-continental shopping spree. They traded everything from furs to amber, and if you threw a rock in a medieval marketplace, you were likely to hit a Viking selling something exotic. They had trade routes that stretched from the icy north to the opulent markets of Baghdad. Talk about a frequent sailor program. But why the myths about them being just a bunch of berserker lunatics? Well, stories of raiding are a bit more exciting than tales of haggling over walrus tusks. The first recorded Viking raid at Lindisfarne in 793 AD was a shocker for Christian Europe. Monasteries, with their golden chalices and poorly defended walls, were like candy stores to the Vikings. But here's a fun fact, a lot of Viking raids were actually more like hostile takeovers. They'd sack a place, sure, but then they'd settle down and start farming. They were the original property flippers, if you will. Socially, these Norsemen and women weren't just a bunch of loners on a longboat. They had a complex society with a thing for law and order. Their legal system included assemblies called things, where free men could discuss issues and make decisions. Forget the image of chaotic anarchy. They were more organized than a PTA meeting. And let's talk mythology, because if you thought Marvel's Thor was cool, wait till you hear about the real deal. Norse mythology was deeply interwoven with their everyday lives, offering explanations for the unexplainable. It was a world where gods like Odin and Thor were as real to them as your favorite celebrity is to you today. The myths were born from the Norse need to make sense of a world that was often brutal and unpredictable. If a storm wrecked your ship, it wasn't just bad luck. It was Thor having a temper tantrum. The gods were reflections of their environment, capricious, powerful, and a little bit terrifying. These stories were passed down through skalds, the Norse equivalent of a rock star poet who travelled from village to village with tales of heroism, divine whimsy, and epic quests. The appeal of these myths is undeniable. Who doesn't love a story where a hammer-wielding god smashes a frost giant? But beneath the hammer blows and epic battles, there's a deep human need to understand and control the world around them. So, the next time someone mentions Vikings, don't just think about the helmets, which, by the way, weren't horned. That's a 19th century opera fabrication. Think about the traders, the explorers, the settlers, and yes, the occasional raiders. They were complex, multifaceted, and frankly, a fascinating bunch who did much more than just swing a sword. They were carving out a living in a world that demanded resilience and resourcefulness, and their myths were as much a part of that survival toolkit as their ships were. Norse mythology wasn't just a collection of bedtime stories, it was the lens through which they viewed their universe, a universe as unpredictable as the sea that surrounded them. Now, let's dive into the Norse pantheon and meet the head honchos of mythological Scandinavia. These guys weren't just sitting around Valhalla sipping mead, they were the rock stars of the Viking cosmos. Starting with Odin, the All-Father. This one-eyed wonder wasn't just any god, he was the CEO of Asgard. Odin's CV is impressive, god of wisdom, war, poetry, and, bizarrely enough, necromancy. This guy had an eye for detail, literally, since he sacrificed one of his own for wisdom. Talk about commitment to the cause. But don't let the poetic charm fool you. Odin was as shrewd as they come. He was known for his insatiable thirst for knowledge, which involved some rather unconventional learning methods, like hanging from a tree for 9 days to discover runes. The real-world inspiration for Odin might have been a composite of tribal leaders who wielded power through both warfare and diplomacy, a kind of ancient Norse Machiavelli. Then there's Thor, the muscle of the operation. With a hammer that could flatten mountains, Thor wasn't just a god, he was a weather system with arms. Responsible for thunder, lightning and protection, his role was a bit like that of a medieval bouncer. If something needed smashing, Thor was your go-to guy. His appeal is obvious. Who wouldn't want a strong, dependable hero in a world where a bad storm could ruin your whole year? In reality, Thor's origins might have been a mix of various storm deities, reflecting the harsh, unpredictable climate of Scandinavia, where surviving the elements was akin to surviving a battle. And then we have Loki, the wild card. If the Norse pantheon was a rock band, Loki was the drummer, unpredictable and prone to setting things on fire, sometimes literally. God of mischief and chaos, Loki's stories are a roller coaster ride of antics and betrayals. He was the original trickster, always shaking things up, and his real-world counterparts were possibly the outcasts and rebels of Viking society, people who defied norms and kept everyone on their toes. Loki's myths served as both entertainment and a caution, a reminder that chaos was never far from the orderly world the Vikings tried to carve out. The stories of these gods were like the Norse Netflix, a mix of drama, comedy, and horror serving multiple purposes. They were moral tales, teaching lessons of courage, loyalty, and the consequences of hubris. They also doubled as political propaganda, reinforcing the social hierarchy and the divine right of rulers. After all, if your king claimed descent from Odin, you'd think twice before questioning his taxes. But let's not gloss over the PR spin. These gods were romanticized figures, their stories polished by skalds to captivate and control. The truth is, the real Vikings likely worshipped a more mundane pantheon, with gods that were as flawed and human as those who told their tales. The grandiose legends we know today were shaped by centuries of retelling, influenced by Christian scribes who added their own flavor, much like a director's cut with a different agenda. Take Thor, for instance. His hammer, Mjolnir, was more than a weapon. It was a symbol of protection and blessing. But in truth, it was probably inspired by the tools of daily life. A blacksmith's hammer, a farmer's plough transformed into something extraordinary. And Odin, with his ravens and wolves, was likely an idealized version of a chieftain, surrounded by advisors and warriors. These stories elevated the everyday struggles of survival into divine narratives. So, while the myths paint a picture of larger-than-life heroes and villains, the reality was likely more grounded. The Norse gods were reflections of the human condition, embodying the hopes, fears, and challenges of a society on the edge of the world. Their stories were a way to make sense of it all, providing comfort and continuity in a landscape as unpredictable as the Norse seas. Keep these tales in mind, and you'll see that Norse mythology is not just about gods and giants. It's a mirror reflecting the human struggle to understand the forces that shape our lives. And speaking of the forces that shape our lives, let's dive into Ragnarok, the Norse apocalypse, the blockbuster finale of Viking mythology. This is the ultimate tale of fire and ice, where the gods meet their doom and the world makes a dramatic exit stage left. If you thought Armageddon was intense, wait until you hear about this end of the world party. Ragnarok is the mythological mic drop, a cosmic showdown where the Norse gods face off against their arch-nemeses in a battle that makes Game of Thrones look like a friendly game of chess. Picture this: Odin, Thor, Loki, and the rest of the Asgardian gang squaring off against giants, serpents, and wolves, with the fate of the universe hanging in the balance. It's the original all bets are off scenario, where even the gods aren't safe from the ultimate plot twist death. But why were the Vikings so obsessed with this doomsday scenario? Well, when your daily life involved battling the elements and the occasional neighbouring tribe, the idea of everything going up in flames wasn't too far-fetched. Ragnarok wasn't just a tale of destruction, it was a reflection of the harsh realities the Norse faced. Life in Scandinavia wasn't exactly a walk in the park, or fjord in this case. The unpredictable climate and limited resources meant that survival was a constant struggle. In a world where winter could last half the year and summer was more of a suggestion than a season, the idea of an apocalyptic reckoning was both a terrifying and strangely comforting thought. You see, Ragnarok wasn't just about the end of everything. The Vikings believed that after the destruction, the world would be reborn and the cycle of life would start anew. This cyclical view of time was deeply ingrained in Norse culture. It wasn't the end, just a reboot. Kind of like when your computer crashes and you have to start from scratch. The apocalypse was just another part of the natural order, a reminder that even in death there was the promise of renewal. Now, let's talk about fate. The Norse were big on destiny, believing that everything was predetermined by the Norns, three mystical weavers of fate who controlled the destinies of gods and men alike. With Ragnarök, the Vikings embraced a fatalistic view of the world. They believed that no matter how hard you fought, the end was inevitable. This wasn't just about accepting the Grim Reaper's invitation, it was about facing it with a warrior's resolve. The Vikings saw honour in meeting their fate head-on, a sentiment captured perfectly in their sagas and tales. It was less about the end itself, and more about how you faced it. But don't let the doom and gloom fool you. The myth of Ragnarök isn't all dark clouds and despair. It also speaks to the resilience and adaptability of the Norse people. In the face of adversity, they found strength, courage, and a sense of community. When your future is as uncertain as a Norse winter, you learn to roll with the punches, or, in their case, the axe blows. The Vikings were nothing if not adaptable, and Ragnarök reflects that tenacity. In economic terms, the Vikings were experts in risk management. If you could call setting sail across treacherous seas in a wooden ship managing risk, they understood that life was unpredictable, and their mythology mirrored that reality. Ragnarök was a story that prepared them for the worst while instilling hope for a new beginning. And let's not forget the political angle. Ragnarök served as a cautionary tale, a reminder to the Viking chieftains and kings that power was fleeting and even the mightiest could fall. It was a story that reinforced the importance of leadership, courage, and the ability to adapt to changing circumstances. In a society where alliances were as stable as a house of cards in a hurricane, Ragnarök was both a warning and a reminder of the cyclical nature of power and life. Now, you might be wondering where all this leaves us in terms of historical reality. Did the Norse really believe the world would end in a cataclysmic battle? The evidence suggests that while they took the myth seriously, they also saw it as a metaphor for life's unpredictability. It was a tale that resonated with the human condition, much like modern disaster movies that captivate us with their tales of destruction and heroism. Ragnarök, in many ways, was the ultimate story of survival, resilience, and the enduring human spirit. And so, as we leave the fiery horizon of Ragnarök behind, remember that this myth was more than just a tale of destruction. It was a reflection of a culture that faced the realities of life with courage and a touch of defiance. In the Norse world, the end was just another beginning, a chance to rebuild and start anew. So, when life throws you a Ragnarök moment, just channel your inner Viking and remember, it's not the end of the world. It's just a new chapter waiting to be written. Speaking of new chapters, let's turn the page to the women of Norse mythology and Viking society, a topic often shrouded in both admiration and oversimplification. If you're picturing women as mere background players in Viking tales, think again. They were more like the directors behind the scenes, wielding influence in ways that would make any modern-day power broker sit up and take notes. First up, let's talk about Freyja, the goddess of love, beauty, and a little bit of war on the side. Freyja was like your favourite aunt who could charm her way out of a parking ticket and also hold her own in a bar brawl. She wasn't just a pretty face. She was a fierce warrior, commanding the souls of the slain to her hall, Falconry, which was like Valhalla's cooler, less crowded cousin. And she had a chariot pulled by cats, because why not? Freyja's multifaceted nature reflects the complex roles women played in Norse society, where they were expected to be both nurturing and formidable. But let's not forget Hel, the goddess overseeing the realm of the dead. Hel ruled with an iron grip, or maybe an iron glove, considering her dad was Loki, the trickster god. Hel's domain wasn't exactly a vacation spot, it was more like the DMV of the afterlife. Despite her grim reputation, Hel was a potent symbol of inevitability and resilience. Her presence in the pantheon underscored the Norse acceptance of death as part of life's cycle, a bit like taxes, only colder. Now, let's dive into the Valkyries, those mythical warrior maidens who decided which warriors would dine in Valhalla. These ladies were like the ancient world's talent scouts, plucking the bravest souls from the battlefield. The image of the Valkyrie has been romanticized over the centuries, turning them into ethereal beings with flowing hair and armor that somehow defies physics. But here's the myth-busting scoop. Valkyries likely served as metaphors for the very real women who played crucial roles in Viking society. They were the embodiment of fierce independence, a reflection of the societal respect for women's strength and wisdom. In reality, the status of women in Viking society was a mixed bag, a bit like grabbing a mystery box at an auction. On one hand, they had rights that would make their medieval European counterparts green with envy. Viking women could own property, initiate divorce, and reclaim dowries. They were the CEOs of their households, running the show while the men were off trading or raiding. However, they weren't exactly living in a feminist utopia. Their world was still very much a patriarchy, where social expectations could be as restrictive as a tight corset. Now, about those shield maidens. Let's be real. The idea of women warriors swinging swords alongside their male counterparts is as thrilling as it is exaggerated. Historical evidence for shield maidens is as elusive as Loki's good intentions. While there are sagas and poems that mention these warrior women, the archaeological record is somewhat sparse. What we do know is that women could and did fight when necessary. Viking society was practical like that. When your survival depends on every able-bodied person pitching in, gender lines blur faster than a raiding longship on the horizon. Economically, Viking women were power players. They managed farms, handled finances, and were key to the trade networks that stretched from the icy north to the silk roads of the east. They were the original multitaskers, balancing household duties with the demands of trade and travel. A runestone found in Denmark even commemorates a woman named Thyra, who was described as a proud woman and ornament of Denmark, which is the Viking equivalent of being voted most likely to succeed. Politically, women could wield influence through strategic marriages and alliances. They were the original political consultants, advising their husbands and occasionally stepping into leadership roles themselves. The sagas tell of women like Queen Gunhild, who was as cunning as she was beautiful, a formidable figure in the halls of power. But remember, these tales were often written down centuries later by Christian monks with their own agendas, so take them with a grain of salt, preferably the size of Thor's hammer. The myths and realities of Viking women paint a picture of a society that, while patriarchal, recognized the value and strength of its women. The romanticized image of shield maidens and Valkyries has enduring appeal, capturing the imagination with tales of fierce independence and martial prowess. Yet, the true story is far more nuanced, reflecting both the limitations and opportunities that women navigated in a world as unpredictable as the Norse seas. So, as we forge ahead into the next chapter of our Norse saga, remember that the women of this era were as complex and compelling as the myths they inspired. Whether they were goddesses commanding the hearts of warriors, or real-life matriarchs managing the home front, their legacy is one of resilience, resourcefulness, and a certain flair for the dramatic. Just like the Vikings themselves, these women were more than just the sum of their parts. They were the heartbeat of a society that thrived on the edge of the world. And speaking of legacies, let's leap from the frozen fjords of history to the bright lights of Hollywood and the small screen, where Norse mythology has found a second life. You see, the gods and warriors of ancient Scandinavia have done more than just hang out in Valhalla. They've crashed onto our screens, courtesy of Marvel's Thor and TV's Vikings. These modern adaptations have taken the raw, wild energy of Norse myths and spun them into stories that are part blockbuster spectacle, part historical soap opera. Let's start with Marvel's Thor, the god of thunder turned superhero heartthrob, who swapped his ancient hammer for a CGI-laden one and became a box-office juggernaut. In Norse mythology, Thor was a symbol of strength and protection, wielding Mjolnir to keep the frost giants at bay. But Marvel's Thor? He's more like a Norse demigod meets rock star, complete with a six-pack that looks like it was sculpted by Michelangelo himself. And while they got the hammer right, yes, it's still a weapon of mass destruction. The character's transformation into a hero for the modern age is fascinating. They've kept the essence of Thor's courage and might, but added layers of humour and existential drama that resonate with today's audiences. Who knew a god could suffer from a midlife crisis, right? But let's not pretend Marvel hasn't taken a few liberties, shall we? In the comics and films, Thor's world is a cosmic playground where science meets fantasy in a kaleidoscope of colour and chaos. As entertaining as this is, it's a far cry from the grim and gritty tales the Vikings spun around fires. Marvel's Asgard looks more like a futuristic metropolis than the rugged, mythical realm of old. They've turned the gods into aliens and made the Rainbow Bridge into a Bifrost superhighway. Sure, it's a bit of a stretch, but isn't that the point? These stories are meant to captivate, to entertain, and to bring a bit of magic into the mundane. By reimagining Thor, Marvel isn't just selling tickets, they're keeping ancient myths alive in the cultural bloodstream. Meanwhile, the TV series Vikings has taken a different tack, opting for a more historically inspired approach. Sure, it's got its fair share of dramatic embellishments, because let's be honest, real history doesn't come with commercial breaks. But Vikings has done a commendable job of bringing the Viking age to life. With its gritty realism, the show captures the harshness of life in medieval Scandinavia, where the weather was as harsh as the social hierarchies. It delves into the politics, the battles, and the Norse belief systems with all the subtlety of a longship crashing through a monastery door. Ragnar Lothbrok, the show's legendary protagonist, is a composite of several historical figures wrapped in the allure of myth. The real Ragnar might not have been quite the charismatic marauder with a penchant for existential monologues, but his on-screen persona resonates because it taps into something timeless. The themes of adventure, loyalty, and ambition are universal, and Vikings has done a stellar job of highlighting the tension between destiny and free will, a struggle as old as the gods themselves. In doing so, it has introduced a new generation to the complexities of Norse culture, even if it occasionally plays fast and loose with the facts. But why do these stories still capture our imagination? Perhaps it's because the core themes of Norse mythology, heroism, adventure, and the cosmic comedy of existence, are evergreen. The Vikings faced a world that was unpredictable and often hostile, much like our own. Their myths provided a framework for understanding chaos, and in a world where we're all trying to make sense of things, who doesn't love a good story about a hero facing impossible odds? It's the same reason we devour tales of superheroes and epic battles today. It's not just escapism, it's a way to grapple with our own challenges, to find courage in the face of uncertainty. The enduring appeal of Norse mythology also lies in its reflection of the human condition. The gods were flawed, capricious, and often downright petty. Sound familiar? They were larger-than-life figures who made mistakes and faced consequences, just like us. In that sense, these myths are deeply human, offering lessons in resilience and survival. They remind us that even the mighty fall, but life goes on, a comforting thought in a world that often feels out of control. And let's not forget the humour. The Norse had a knack for weaving comedy into their tales, using wit and irony to navigate the absurdities of existence. This existential comedy resonates today, as we navigate a world that seems to change at breakneck speed. The humour in Norse myths isn't just about the punchline, it's about finding joy and meaning in the chaos, a lesson as relevant now as it was 1,000 years ago. As we wrap up our journey through the icy realms of Norse mythology, it's clear that these ancient tales are more than just relics of the past. They've been reshaped and retold for modern audiences, keeping the spirit of the Vikings alive in our cultural consciousness. Whether it's through blockbuster films or historical dramas, the myths of old continue to echo through the halls of Asgard and beyond, reminding us of the timeless dance between fate and courage, chaos and order. So, the next time you watch Thor swing his hammer or see Ragnar strategizing over an ale, remember that these stories are part of a legacy that stretches back centuries. They're not just entertainment, they're a bridge to a world that once was, a reminder of the resilience and creativity of a people who dared to dream beyond their icy shores. And who knows, maybe, just maybe, there's a bit of Viking spirit in all of us, ready to face whatever Ragnarok life throws our way. In a world where the word nun conjures images of solemn piety and relentless devotion, it's time to pull back the veil and take a peek at the not-so-holy underbelly of medieval convent life. Forget the serene whispers of prayer and the saintly glow of candlelit vigils. This was a time when the cloistered life was less about spiritual purity and more about dodging the chaos of medieval family politics. Yes, behind those heavy convent doors, there was a whole lot more going on than just hymns and hallelujahs. Now, let's talk numbers, because at the heart of it, convent life was often driven by cold, hard cash. Back in the day, joining a convent wasn't as simple as taking a vow of chastity and calling it a life choice. Nope, it was more like negotiating a medieval mortgage. The entry fee? A hefty dowry. We're not talking pocket change here. In 14th century Florence, for example, a dowry could easily run over 200 florins. To put that into perspective, that's enough to buy you a decent castle view or a small army of sheep. So why would a family shell out this kind of cash just to cloister their daughter away? Well, sometimes the convent was the lesser evil compared to marrying her off to the local Lord Grumpy Pants. These dowries were more than just a financial transaction. They were a strategic move in the chess game of family politics. By sending their daughters to convents, families could avoid the cost of an even larger marriage dowry, or, even better, keep the family fortune from being split like a medieval pie. It was a way to maintain control, keep wealth in the family, and occasionally dodge the drama of extended family feuds. And when your choices are limited by the whims of medieval matchmaking, the convent starts to look like a pretty sweet deal. But let's not pretend that the convent was a sanctuary of unblemished virtue. Sure, the nuns were supposed to be brides of Christ, but some of these brides had a serious case of cold feet. In reality, convents were a microcosm of society, with all its human desires, ambitions, and yes, scandals. These weren't just holy havens, but also hotbeds of intrigue and, occasionally, carnal shenanigans. Take, for instance, the convent in Pescia, Italy, which became infamous for its rather unorthodox activities in the 15th century. The Mother Superior there had a penchant for organising covert parties that would make a modern rave look like a teetotaler's tea party. And when you mix young women, a lack of supervision, and a few too many flagons of wine, things can start to get spicy. Of course, these stories might sound like the stuff of fiction, but they're backed by the not-so-romantic records of the time. Letters, diaries, and church documents reveal that some convents were less about divine devotion and more like a medieval version of the Real Housewives. These nunnery narratives may be shocking, but they also underscore a critical truth. Nuns were not angels, but humans, with all the complexities that come with that territory. Convent life also offered an unexpected paradox. A place that, on the surface, symbolized restriction and confinement could actually provide a surprising degree of freedom. Within the convent walls, women had access to education, a rarity in a society where literacy was often a privilege reserved for men. They could manage their own affairs, engage in intellectual pursuits, and even wield significant power, both spiritually and economically. Some of the most influential women of the Middle Ages were abbesses, who ran their convents with the acumen of a modern CEO. So, as we embark on this journey through the shadowy corners of medieval convents, remember that the story of these nuns is not one of pure sanctity nor wanton debauchery, but rather the messy, intriguing mix of both. These women navigated the complexities of their era with as much cunning and grace as any knight, king, or pope. And if that meant throwing the occasional clandestine shindig or rewriting the rulebook on piety, well, who can really blame them? After all, when life gives you dowries, sometimes you just have to make medieval lemonade. And speaking of medieval lemonade, let's pour ourselves a goblet and toast to the convent of St. Farah, where the line between piety and passion was blurrier than a fresco after a flood. Welcome to the 14th century, a time when the convent was less a house of God and more a house of chaos, where the real miracle was keeping the scandals under wraps. Now, the nuns at St. Farah were not your garden variety brides of Christ. They were more like brides with benefits. A little less divine devotion, a little more divine intervention needed to hide their escapades. This convent, nestled in the heart of France, was infamous for a scandal that would make today's celebrity gossip columns look like a church bulletin. Behind those imposing convent walls, a tapestry of clandestine romances unfolded. Nuns were known to have secret liaisons with local men, and sometimes even with the clergy. Yes, you heard that right, the very men who were supposed to be their spiritual guides. And while you might think this sounds like the plot of a tawdry novel, church records and papal decrees tell the tale with a straight face. But why, you ask, would nuns risk it all for forbidden love? Well, Living in a convent was like being in a pressure cooker of restriction, where human desires simmered until they inevitably bubbled over. These women were often locked away, not just physically but socially, and the prospects of love, or even just a good flirt, were about as alluring as a feast, day after a fast. And here's the kicker. The church wasn't always the moral watchdog you'd expect. In some cases, it turned a blind eye, or even exploited these affairs for its own gain. Take, for example, the case of Sister Marguerite, whose dalliance with a local nobleman was used by the church as leverage against his family, resulting in a tidy sum added to the church's coffers. In the medieval world, sometimes sin was just another commodity to be traded. Economically, the convents were like little fiefdoms managing lands and resources. This meant that abbesses, those savvy CEOs and habits, often wielded more power than one might expect. They could negotiate with local lords, manage estates, and sometimes even dictate terms with the church itself. The convent of St. Farah, for instance, held lands that brought in enough income to rival that of a minor noble, making it a key player in local politics. And let's not forget the dowries, those hefty payments that could fund a small crusade. These financial stakes meant that keeping a nun's reputation intact was crucial. A scandalous affair could jeopardize not just the nun's soul, but the economic stability of the entire community. So while the church might have been in on the game, it also had much to lose if the skeletons in St. Farah's closet were ever to dance out into the open. Yet, despite the potential fallout, love, or something like it, found a way. Secret meetings took place in hidden corners of the convent, letters were exchanged under the cover of darkness, and sometimes, quite scandalously, nuns would even manage to slip away for a tryst outside the cloister. The human heart, it seems, was as unpredictable then as it is now. The church, for its part, often played both sides of the fence. While publicly condemning such behaviour, it quietly capitalized on the scandals when it suited its political agendas. The convent's very existence depended on the church's good graces, which meant that any leverage, however unsavoury, could be a valuable bargaining chip in the power plays of the medieval world. So there you have it, a peek behind the convent walls, where the nuns of St. Farah danced the delicate waltz of devotion and desire. It's a tale as old as time, the struggle between societal expectations and personal freedoms, all set against the backdrop of a world that was as unpredictable as a medieval market day. As we continue our journey through the labyrinthine halls of history, remember that the story of these nuns is not just about scandal, but survival in a world where the stakes were as high as the cathedral spires. And if that meant bending a few rules or hearts along the way, well, who can really blame them? Now, as we continue our journey through the labyrinthine halls of history, the tale of these nuns is far from over. The saga of piety and passion unfolds, but we must now delve into the economic and political ripples caused by these convent capers. Imagine a medieval scandal as a particularly juicy stone dropped into the placid pond of ecclesiastical life. The splash might be localized, but the ripples? Oh, they travel far. First off, let's talk about the florins. Those shiny gold coins that ruled medieval Europe's pocketbooks with an iron fist. When a scandal erupted within the cloistered walls, it wasn't just a matter of spiritual concern, it was a financial fiasco waiting to be exploited or hushed up for the right price. Local authorities and church officials often responded to such events with a pragmatic twist. Fines. These weren't just slap-on-the-wrist penalties either. Fines could climb as high as 50 florins, which in today's terms might buy you a designer handbag or a month's rent in a swanky city loft. In the 14th century, it could be the difference between a peasant's hovel and a noble's manor. These fines served multiple purposes. For local authorities, it was a tidy way to fill the town coffers while maintaining a semblance of order. For the church, it was both punishment and profit. By imposing financial penalties, they could publicly condemn the behaviour while privately padding their purse. A win-win for the ecclesiastical elite. Meanwhile, the nuns involved often bore the brunt of public shaming, a grim reminder that while money could buy silence, it couldn't scrub away the stain of scandal. The political implications of these convent controversies were equally significant. In a world where the personal was inherently political, the fallout from these affairs could shift alliances and alter power dynamics. Consider this. A scandal could provide leverage in negotiations between the church and local nobility. Suppose a noble was implicated in a convent scandal. In that case, the church could use this sordid detail as a bargaining chip, extracting concessions or securing favourable terms for land deals or political support. Moreover, these incidents had a broader societal impact, challenging and reshaping perceptions of the church and female virtue. The medieval church wielded immense power over both spiritual and temporal realms, positioning itself as the moral compass of society. Yet, these scandals exposed the church's own hypocrisies and vulnerabilities, eroding the blind faith that many had placed in its sanctity. The realization that the convents, supposed bastions of purity, were susceptible to the same human failings as the secular world forced a re-evaluation of the church's moral authority. And what about the nuns themselves? These women were caught in a tug-of-war between societal expectations and personal agency. On one hand, they were expected to embody the epitome of female virtue, living lives of chastity, piety, and obedience. On the other, they were human beings with desires, ambitions, and flaws. The scandals painted a more complex picture of medieval womanhood, revealing the tension between the ideal and the real. In a society that often sought to control and confine women, the convent offered a paradoxical blend of restriction and empowerment. Let's not forget the role of the abbess, the head honcho of the convent. These women were the ultimate multitaskers, managing the spiritual needs of their charges while also overseeing the economic and political affairs of the convent. They had to navigate the murky waters of church politics, balancing the demands of the clergy with the needs of their nuns. In times of scandal, the abbess was the one tasked with damage control, whether that meant negotiating fines, placating local authorities, or finding a way to discreetly handle the situation without attracting further attention. The economic stakes of these scandals extended beyond fines. Convents often held lands and resources that contributed significantly to local economies. A scandal could jeopardize these holdings by damaging the convent's reputation and, by extension, its ability to generate income. For example, if a convent's lands were seen as tainted by scandal, local lords might be less inclined to engage in trade or offer protection, leading to economic isolation and decline. In the grand narrative of history, these convent scandals serve as a reminder that the past was as complex and nuanced as our present. These weren't just isolated incidents of naughtiness behind cloistered walls, they were events that rippled through society, challenging norms and reshaping the medieval landscape both economically and politically. They reveal a world where the sacred and the secular were inextricably intertwined, where money and morality danced a delicate waltz, and where women navigated a labyrinth of expectations with as much cunning and grace as any knight or king. As we close this chapter, remember that our exploration is far from over. The dance of devotion and desire continues, with more tales to tell and more secrets to uncover. The medieval world was a tapestry of contradictions, woven together by the threads of faith, power, and human folly. And in the world of medieval convents, those threads often unraveled in the most intriguing ways. So, stay tuned for more revelations from the cloisters, where the line between virtue and vice was as thin as a nun's veil. As we leave the shadowy corners of convent life behind, imagine these scandals as the medieval equivalent of viral TikToks. Juicy, tantalizing, and just too good not to share. But back then, the medium wasn't a digital platform, it was the quill and parchment where tales of nuns behaving badly found their way into literature and art, shaping cultural narratives that lingered for centuries. Now, let's dive into the medieval literary scene, where scandalous tales of nunneries were as popular as a knight in shining armor tale. Back in the day, these stories were the Netflix of their time, offering everything from drama and comedy to moral lessons. Take The Decameron by Giovanni Boccaccio, penned in the 14th century. Boccaccio wasn't just spinning yarns, he was weaving satire, poking fun at the hypocrisy of religious figures while also giving the public a good laugh at their expense. In one story, a nun is caught with a lover, but cleverly deflects the blame onto her accuser, leading readers to question who's really in the wrong, the sinner or the snitch. This wasn't just entertainment, it was a social commentary wrapped in a medieval meme. It highlighted the human tendency to find fault in others while ignoring one's own failings. Boccaccio's tales held a mirror to society, reflecting both the ridiculousness and the reality of the times, and they resonated because they spoke to the universal truths of human nature. But it wasn't all jests and jabs. Some stories served as cautionary tales, portraying convents as places of moral peril. In these narratives, the nunnery became a microcosm of temptation, where women could easily fall from grace. Such stories were less about the actual nuns and more about reinforcing societal norms, the medieval equivalent of a scared straight program, warning women to behave or else. Paintings and illuminations doubled down on these themes, using vivid imagery to capture the scandalous allure of convent life. These artworks were the Instagram posts of their day, depicting nuns in compromising situations with as much subtlety as a neon sign. They were a visual feast that delighted and scandalized in equal measure, often commissioned by those with a vested interest in portraying convents as dens of iniquity. Art, much like a juicy gossip column, had a way of exaggerating reality to keep its audience hooked. Yet, let's not forget the other side of the illuminated manuscript. Not all portrayals were scandalous. Some works depicted nuns as paragons of virtue, their serene faces a stark contrast to the chaos suggested by the more salacious tales. These pieces aimed to reassure the faithful that, contrary to the rumours, not every convent was a haven for the morally questionable. The reality, as always, was likely somewhere in the middle. And here's where the plot thickens. These stories and images were as much about the Church's image as they were about the nuns themselves. The Catholic Church, ever the brand-conscious entity, was keenly aware of its public perception. Scandals could tarnish its reputation, but the literature and art that sprang from these controversies could also be used to reinforce its authority. By allowing some tales to spread while quietly suppressing others, the Church maintained a delicate balance, wielding narrative as deftly as it did the cross. The myths and legends that grew from these scandals served to both entertain and instruct, but they also obfuscated the true nature of convent life. Behind the stories lay a reality that was far more complex. Nuns were not just players in someone else's narrative, they were real women with agency, navigating a world that often sought to control them. The cultural legacy of these scandals is like a quilt. Each piece tells its own story, adding up to a patchwork of medieval society's fears, desires, and moral lessons. These tales reveal how societies use stories to impose order on a chaotic world, providing moral clarity where reality was anything but clear. As we unravel the threads of these narratives, we're left with more questions than answers. Were these tales an accurate reflection of convent life, or were they exaggerated for effect? Did they serve to empower women by highlighting their agency, or did they reinforce the very structures that sought to control them? The answers are as elusive as a nun's smile behind a wimple. But what remains clear is this: the stories we tell about the past shape our understanding of it for better or worse. These tales of convent scandals, with their blend of fact and fiction, remind us of the power of narrative to both illuminate and obscure the truth. So, as we prepare to explore further into the world of medieval nuns, remember that the stories we've heard are just one layer of a much deeper tapestry. There are more threads to unravel, more truths to uncover, and more tales to tell. The dance of devotion and desire continues, and with it, the story of nuns who lived in a world not so different from our own, a world where truth and myth coexist in a delicate balance. Stay tuned, because the medieval saga is far from over. And so, as we teeter on the edge of medieval mystery and modern intrigue, let's reflect on why these tales of nuns behaving badly continue to captivate us. After all, aren't we all just rubberneckers at the crash site of history, unable to look away from the delicious wreckage of human folly? The medieval nun scandal is an enduring narrative because it speaks to timeless themes: the clash between personal desire and institutional control, the hypocrisy of the powerful, and the human heart's perpetual defiance of social constraints. Consider this: the convent was supposed to be a fortress of piety, yet it often turned into a pressure cooker of pent-up desires. It's a paradox as juicy as medieval swan pie. An institution designed to suppress individual will ended up amplifying it. For every tale of scandal, there's an implicit acknowledgement that human nature is irrepressible, even when dressed in a habit. The stories of nuns smuggling love letters or hosting secret soirees are not just about breaking the rules, they're about the unstoppable force of human emotion meeting the immovable object of religious institutions. And yes, sometimes the unstoppable force wins. The fascination with these convent capers also taps into our collective skepticism of purity. It's the age-old allure of discovering that the holiest among us might be harbouring the most unholy secrets. This isn't just a medieval theme. Think of any modern scandal where the mighty fall from grace. The narrative appeals because it reminds us that virtue is often a veneer, and scratching beneath the surface reveals the messy complexity of human nature. It's as if the medieval nuns were the original cautionary tales, showing us that even the most devout are not immune to temptation. But beyond the scandalous allure, there's a deeper lesson in the legacy of these medieval nuns. They remind us of the societal expectations that confined women then, and how those constraints still echo today. The convents were both prisons and sanctuaries, providing education and agency within the strict confines of religious life. The duality of their existence offers a rich tapestry for understanding the complexities of female agency in a patriarchal society. It's a reminder that the struggle for autonomy is as old as time, and that history is not just a series of events, but a mirror reflecting our ongoing battles for personal freedom. Economically, these nuns were part of a system that turned spiritual pursuits into commerce. The dowries, fines, and financial machinations reveal a world where religion was as much about money as it was about morality. It's a sobering thought that the Church, in its quest for dominion, often prioritized profit over piety. The convents, with their scandals and intrigues, were microcosms of this larger reality, a reality where faith could be both a genuine calling and a transactional affair. It's a reminder that money and morality have danced together throughout history, often leading to tangled steps and missteps. Politically, the scandals were not just personal dramas but chess pieces in the larger game of power. The nuns' indiscretions were used as leverage, their stories manipulated for gain by those in power. It's a narrative that resonates today, showing how the personal is always political, and how the stories of the less powerful can become tools in the hands of those who hold the reins. The medieval nuns, in their quiet rebellion, underscore a truth that still holds, that personal choices can ripple outwards, affecting not just individual lives but the broader societal fabric. As we wrap up our exploration, let's not forget the enduring impact of these tales on cultural narratives. The stories of medieval nuns have transcended their time, morphing into myths that both entertain and educate. They serve as a testament to the power of storytelling, showing how legends are crafted from the raw materials of reality. These tales have been told and retold, each iteration adding new layers of meaning, turning the historical nuns into archetypes of virtue and vice. They remind us that history is as much about the stories we choose to tell as it is about the facts we uncover. So, what's the takeaway from our journey through the convents of medieval Europe? Perhaps it's the realization that human nature is both immutable and endlessly fascinating. The medieval nuns, with their clandestine romances and covert escapades, were not so different from us. They lived in a world shaped by societal norms and institutional control, yet they found ways to assert their individuality. Their stories are a testament to the resilience of the human spirit, showing us that even in the most restrictive environments, the desire for autonomy and connection can never be fully extinguished. In the end, the tale of the medieval nuns is a story of survival and subversion, of women navigating a world that sought to define them in narrow terms. It's a narrative that challenges us to look beyond the surface, to question the stories we inherit, and to find the nuanced truths within the legends. As we close the chapter on this historical journey, let's raise a metaphorical goblet to the nuns of the medieval world. May their stories continue to inspire us to question, to explore, and to seek the deeper truths within the tapestry of history. Cheers to the nuns who dared to defy the odds, and to the timeless tales they left behind, a reminder that the past is never just the past, but a living dialogue with the present. The Druids. Just the name conjures images of ancient men in robes, standing in misty groves, muttering incantations under the celestial gaze of the moon. While they might not have had the Hollywood-approved version of mystical powers, the Druids were undeniably a powerhouse in the Celtic world from around 300 BCE to 100 CE. These folks were the Swiss army knife of their society, religious leaders, political advisors, and the original conflict resolution gurus. And before you ask, yes, they really did wield a lot of influence, though perhaps not the kind that involved shooting lightning from their fingertips. Picture the Celtic society as a bustling marketplace of tribes, each with their own chiefs jostling for power and prestige. And in the middle of this chaotic scene, you'd find the Druids, cool as cucumbers, whispering sage advice into the ears of these tribal leaders. But were they really the all-knowing, all-seeing mystical figures they're often made out to be? Let's just say, the reality is a tad more grounded than the legend. The Druids had a hand in everything from religious rites to lawmaking, and their word carried weight, a lot of it. They were like the ultimate backstage managers, pulling strings from behind the scenes while the tribal chiefs took the spotlight. Think of them as the ancient version of political spin doctors, only with a penchant for natural settings and an impressive knowledge of the stars. Julius Caesar himself, in his Commentary de Bello Gallico, noted that the Druids were exempt from military service and didn't have to pay taxes. So, they were basically the rock stars of their age, minus the screaming fans and groupies. Now, let's dive into their reputation as mystical priests. Yes, they did perform religious ceremonies, but before you get too excited about ritualistic sacrifices and magical chants, it's worth noting that their real power lay in their brains, not their rituals. They were well versed in astronomy, geology, and philosophy. They could probably name every constellation in the night sky while debating the finer points of ethics and governance. It's a bit like your college philosophy professor moonlighting as an astrologer. Their role as political advisors is where things get particularly juicy. Druids were the ultimate mediators, the UN peacekeepers of their time, if you will. They were known for their ability to arbitrate disputes, not just between tribe leaders, but also among the tribes themselves. You've got two tribes on the brink of war over a patch of land? Call in the Druids. They'll sort it out with a few wise words and maybe a ritual or two to seal the deal. But let's not kid ourselves. The Druids weren't exactly impartial saints. They had their own interests and ambitions. They were adept at using their influence to steer decisions in directions that favoured them. Perhaps a little like that friend who always manages to get you to pick the restaurant they want. Their knack for diplomacy was as much about maintaining their own status as it was about keeping the peace. The myth of the omniscient Druid is alluring, but reality paints a picture of a group that was more about social engineering than sorcery. Their power didn't stem from some mystical force, but from their deep understanding of human nature and society. They were experts at reading the room and playing the long game. Even their supposed ability to foresee the future was more about keen observation than crystal balls. They could predict outcomes based on their vast experience and understanding of the world around them. So, when a Druid told a chief that invading a neighbouring tribe might not be the best idea, it was less about peering into the future and more about knowing that the neighbouring tribe had just formed an alliance with another. It's less magical foresight and more strategic foresight. In essence, the Druids were the intellectual elite of Celtic society. They were the ones who kept things running smoothly, ensuring that the chiefs didn't turn every minor dispute into an all-out war. They were the guardians of knowledge, the keepers of traditions, and the whisperers of wisdom. They might not have been able to turn lead into gold or summon thunder with a snap of their fingers, but their influence was golden enough. As for their mystical side, it's a testament to the power of myth-making. The stories that have woven around them are as fascinating as they are exaggerated, but they capture something essential about the Druids, their ability to captivate and command respect. Whether they were real-world wizards or just really smart guys with a good PR team is up for debate. But one thing's for sure, they left a legacy that still enchants the imagination today. But enough about the Druids' backstage path to power. Let's get to the juicy bits. You've probably heard tales of their enigmatic rituals, the kind that involve sacrifices and mistletoe, right? Well, let's sift through the cinematic haze and find out what really went down in those sacred groves. First up, the infamous human sacrifices. Picture this, a circle of solemn Druids, a trembling victim, and the solemnity of the occasion. But before you conjure up scenes from a horror movie, let's pause. Julius Caesar, our favourite Roman gossip columnist, mentions these sacrifices in Commentary de Bello Gallico. He claimed the Druids would burn people alive in massive wicker structures as offerings to appease the gods. Sounds like something out of a dark fantasy novel, right? Here's the catch. Caesar was trying to paint the Celts as barbaric to justify his conquest of Gaul. A classic case of, look how savage they are, we must civilize them. The reality? Human sacrifices were likely rare, if they happened at all. Archaeological evidence supporting such practices is as elusive as a four-leaf clover. So why did these stories stick? Well, human sacrifice is the kind of sensational story that sells then and now. It's the ancient equivalent of tabloid headlines, shocking, morbidly fascinating, and not entirely accurate. But let's not entirely dismiss the Druids' penchant for rituals. They did perform ceremonies that involved offerings, but these were more likely to be of the animal variety. Think livestock, not locals. These rituals weren't just for show. They served a vital social function, reinforcing the power structures and social cohesion within the tribe. Picture it as the ultimate community bonding event, a cosmic potluck where everyone had a stake in the outcome. Now, onto something a bit less grim but just as mysterious, the mistletoe ceremonies. Forget the modern holiday smooches, this was serious business. Mistletoe was considered sacred by the Druids, particularly if it was found growing on an oak tree. This rare botanical combo was like hitting the mystical jackpot. Why? Because in the Druidic worldview, oaks were the king of trees, and mistletoe was a divine gift. Harvesting it was a ceremony in itself, complete with white robes, golden sickles, and rituals worthy of a Spielberg movie. The Druids believed mistletoe had magical properties, capable of healing ailments and protecting against evil. Economically, these rituals made perfect sense. By positioning themselves as the gatekeepers to such sacred knowledge and practices, the Druids maintained their status and influence. They were the original brand ambassadors for mistletoe, ensuring their tribe saw them as indispensable. The rituals reinforced the idea that the Druids were the chosen intermediaries between the gods and the people, thus cementing their position in the Celtic hierarchy. But why did the Druids go through all this trouble? Well, imagine a world without Google Maps. In ancient times, the landscape was dotted with sacred sites and natural landmarks that held deep spiritual significance. These ceremonies were a way to map the spiritual landscape, create a shared cultural narrative, and integrate the tribes into a cohesive society. The rituals were less about the supernatural and more about the natural order. The Druids wielded their knowledge of the natural world to maintain social order. And let's not ignore the political savvy of these rituals. By controlling the religious narrative, the Druids could steer tribal politics like a seasoned captain navigating stormy seas. Their rituals were a way to remind everyone who held the keys to divine knowledge, ensuring that the tribal chiefs wouldn't get too big for their britches. It was a delicate dance, keeping the chiefs happy while reminding them of their celestial obligations. As we dive deeper into this mystical world, it's essential to remember that while the Druids were revered, they were not beyond reproach. Their practices were as much about maintaining their grip on power as they were about religious devotion. In a world where power was as ephemeral as morning mist, the Druids needed to keep their wits sharp and their rituals sharper. They were the ultimate pragmatists, using the allure of mysticism to consolidate influence. So, the next time you hear about Druidic rituals, remember that behind the mistletoe and sacrifices lay a sophisticated system designed to keep society ticking along. The Druids were masterful at blending myth with reality, creating a tapestry of belief that ensured their role as the intellectual and spiritual elite. They weren't just dancing in the moonlight, they were orchestrating the symphony of society, making sure every note played to their advantage. And while the legend of the Druids continues to enchant us, it's the reality of their cunning and capability that truly deserves the spotlight. They were the ultimate ancient power brokers, weaving a web of influence that extended far beyond the oak groves and into the very heart of Celtic civilization. With every ritual, every whispered incantation, they were writing the script of their society, a script that, despite the embellishments of time, still captivates us today. Speaking of scripts, let's dive into one of the most captivating parts of the Druidic narrative, their supposed tree-hugging, star-gazing lifestyle. Now, don't get too carried away with images of idyllic forest communes and celestial gatherings. While it's tempting to paint the Druids as the original environmentalists, sprinkling wisdom and stardust like ancient John Muir's, the reality is a bit more grounded and less Instagrammable. First up, let's chat about their connection to nature. It's true, Druids were big fans of the great outdoors. Sacred groves, known as nematon, were their spiritual sanctuaries where they performed rituals and communed with the divine. These groves were more than just picturesque picnic spots. They were central to Druidic practice and power. By situating their rituals in nature, Druids reinforce their image as intermediaries between humans and the cosmic forces inhabiting the natural world. But before we give them a gold star for eco-consciousness, remember this. The Celts weren't exactly living in harmony with nature. Their society was heavily reliant on agriculture, and clearing land for crops was a necessary evil. So, while Druids may have revered their sacred groves, they were also part of a society that was transforming the landscape to suit its needs. A bit less, leave no trace, and a bit more, make space for crops. Now, let's turn our gaze skyward. The Druids were known for their astronomical prowess, and they weren't just counting the days until the next eclipse. They developed sophisticated calendar systems, with the colony calendar being the superstar of the bunch. Discovered in modern-day France, this bronze tablet dates back to the 2nd century CE and is a testament to the Druids' celestial savvy. It features a lunar-solar calendar, which balanced the cycles of the moon and the solar year. A complex task that would make even the most seasoned Google Calendar user break into a sweat. This calendar wasn't just for planning tribal potlucks. It was integral to agricultural and religious life. Festivals, rituals, and agricultural activities were all timed according to these celestial calculations. But let's not get too starry-eyed about their astronomical achievements. While the Druids had a knack for reading the stars, their calendar was, let's say, a bit over-engineered. It required adding an extra month every 2.5 years to keep everything aligned, a system as cumbersome as juggling flaming hoops. And despite their cosmic calculations, they couldn't predict the most pressing issues of their time, like when the next tribe over would decide to invade. In a world of constant tribal warfare, the Druids' celestial insights were only as good as their ability to navigate the earthly chaos. So, were the Druids proto-environmentalists with a penchant for star maps? Perhaps not. They were more like the techies of their day, using their knowledge of nature and the cosmos to maintain social order and political clout. Their sacred groves and astronomical systems were tools of influence, not just expressions of reverence for the natural world. They understood that control over the spiritual and celestial narrative meant control over earthly matters, a savvy move in a time when power was more precarious than a house of cards in a windstorm. The irony of it all is delicious. Here were the Druids, masters of natural wisdom, living in a society where tribal skirmishes were as common as cattle raids. Their deep connection to nature and the cosmos coexisted with the brutal realities of Celtic life, a life where survival often depended on the sharpness of your sword rather than the alignment of the stars. It's a testament to their pragmatism that they managed to weave these disparate threads into a cohesive tapestry of belief and power. As we peel back the layers of myth surrounding the Druids, we find a picture that's both less romantic and more fascinating. They weren't just tree-hugging mystics or starry-eyed dreamers. They were shrewd strategists, using the allure of nature and the mysteries of the cosmos to maintain their status at the top of the Celtic food chain. Their connection to the natural world was real, but deeply entwined with their political ambitions and social functions. So, the next time you find yourself gazing up at the stars or strolling through a forest, think of the Druids, not as ethereal beings lost in the mists of time, but as savvy operators who knew that the true magic lay not in the trees or the stars, but in the stories they crafted and the power they wielded. The Druids' legacy is a mix of myth and reality, a reminder that behind every legend lies a more complex and often more intriguing truth. And while their world may seem distant from ours, the human drive to find meaning in nature and the cosmos remains as strong as ever. As we continue our journey through the annals of history, the Druids stand as a testament to the enduring power of myth and the very real influence of those who dare to weave it. As we shift our gaze from the celestial musings of the Druids to the solid ground of history, it's time to unravel the tale of how their world met its Roman reckoning. Picture the British Isles as a vibrant tapestry of tribal life, each thread carefully woven by Druidic influence. Into the Romans, who, with the subtlety of a battering ram, sought to redraw that tapestry to fit their imperial design. The Roman Empire, in its quest for expansion, was like a relentless dinner guest who refuses to leave. By 43 CE, they had turned their attention to the British Isles, not just for its strategic location, but also for its rich resources. Think lead, tin, and those ever-tempting slaves. The Druids, with their deep roots in Celtic culture, posed a significant obstacle to Roman domination. The Romans weren't just about conquering land. They aimed to conquer the mind and spirit, and the Druids were the spiritual backbone of the Celtic resistance. Let's talk strategy, Roman style. The Romans had a knack for turning cultural assimilation into an art form. They were the original brand influencers, promoting Roman religion and culture as the new must-have lifestyle. Sacred sites, those ancient theatres of Druidic power, became prime targets. The Romans understood that to dismantle the Druids' influence, they had to strike at the heart of their spiritual and social authority. The destruction of these sites was more than just a physical blow. It was a calculated move to undermine the very foundation of Celtic identity. Take Anglesey, for example, a Druid stronghold off the coast of Wales. In 60 CE, the Roman governor Gaius Suetonius Paulinus launched a full-scale assault on this mystical bastion. Imagine the scene. Roman legions clashing with Druidic defenders, the air thick with the cries of battle and the scent of burning sacred groves. Tacitus, the Roman historian, described this invasion with a flair for the dramatic, noting the Druids' cries and curses as they confronted the Roman forces. The Romans, unswayed by these spiritual theatrics, systematically cut down the sacred groves and extinguished the flames of Druidic resistance. But why was this such a big deal? Well, those groves were more than just pretty places for a ritual dance. They were the heart of Druidic power and the soul of Celtic spirituality. By desecrating them, the Romans weren't just destroying trees, they were uprooting a culture. It was a masterclass in psychological warfare designed to break the spirit of a people by severing their connection to the divine. Yet, like all determined adversaries, the Druids didn't just roll over. Their resistance became a rallying cry, a symbol of defiance against the Roman steamroller. They embodied the Celtic spirit of rebellion, stoic, fierce, and unyielding. This battle for cultural survival wasn't fought with swords alone, but with the enduring power of identity. The Druids, with their deep-seated traditions and knowledge, became the keepers of a cultural flame that refused to be snuffed out. Enter Boudica, the warrior queen of the Iceni tribe, whose rebellion in 6061 CE was fueled, in part, by the Roman assault on Druidic sanctuaries. She led a fiery uprising against the occupying forces, her army laying waste to Roman settlements in a blaze of vengeance. Here was a woman who embodied the wrath and spirit of her people, a living testament to the Druids' enduring influence. Her revolt, although ultimately crushed, highlighted the deep-seated resentment against Roman rule and the cultural erasure it threatened. Boudica's rebellion was a testament to the Druids' lingering influence, proving that even in decline, their power reverberated through the hearts of the Celtic tribes. The Romans might have won the military battle, but the Druids' legacy lived on as a symbol of resistance and cultural identity. They were the original keepers of the Celtic flame, ensuring that even under Roman rule, the spirit of the Celts flickered defiantly in the shadows. The Roman strategy of cultural integration was both brutal and brilliant. They played the long game, introducing Roman gods and customs, all the while eroding the traditional structures that had upheld Celtic society. It was a slow, insidious process, one that transformed the landscape of the British Isles as effectively as any military campaign. The Romans were masterful in turning religious festivals into opportunities for Roman propaganda, blending their pantheon with local deities and making Roman citizenship a coveted status symbol. Underneath the grandiosity of Roman architecture and the allure of Roman citizenship, however, lay a simmering tension. The Druids, despite being pushed to the fringes, continued to be a thorn in the Roman side. Their influence may have waned, but it hadn't disappeared. They became the guardians of a cultural memory, reminding the Celts of their roots and their resistance. And so, as the Romans built their roads and villas, the Druids became the stuff of legend, a testament to a time when the groves whispered secrets and the stars guided the fates of men. Their decline was not an end, but a transformation, a shift from power to memory. They became a symbol of defiance, a reminder that identity is not so easily erased. The Romans might have conquered the land, but the spirit of the Druids lived on, etched into the cultural DNA of the British Isles. As we continue this historical journey, keep in mind that the story of the Druids is far from over. Their influence may have been subdued by Roman hands, but the echoes of their wisdom and the allure of their mystery continue to captivate us. In the grand tapestry of history, the Druids are a thread that refuses to unravel, a reminder of a world where the mystical and the mundane were seamlessly intertwined. And as we unravel the next chapters, we'll see how their legacy continued to shape the world, even in the shadows of Roman rule. Stay tuned, because the best stories are the ones that linger long after the final page is turned. While the Romans were busy stamping their imperial footprint across the British Isles, the Druids were quietly slipping into the shadows, where their influence would simmer for centuries. Fast forward a couple of millennia, and guess what? The Druids are still with us, lurking in the corners of our imagination like mystical apparitions refusing to fade away. But how did a group of ancient Celtic intellectuals become the poster children for modern mysticism and pop culture magic? Let's start with their portrayal in literature. Oh, the Druids have had quite the literary makeover over the years. From the shadowy figures in Shakespeare's King Lear to the wise mentors in the Arthurian legends, these ancient priests have been cast in roles that range from benevolent sages to sinister sorcerers. It's a bit like casting Morgan Freeman to play anything. He's always going to be the wise old guy, whether he's God or a prisoner. The appeal of the Druid as a mystical, all-knowing figure is undeniable. But why does this image stick? Well, blame it on the Enlightenment. In the 18th century, the Druidic image went through a renaissance of sorts. As Romanticism swept across Europe, people were enchanted by the idea of a lost world where humans lived in harmony with nature, guided by wise elders who understood the secrets of the universe. Druids became the poster boys and girls for this idealized past. They were imagined as guardians of ancient wisdom, a narrative that conveniently ignored their political maneuvering and occasional human sacrifice rumors. It's a bit like romanticizing pirates as lovable rogues while forgetting they were, pirates. This romanticized image was further cemented by literature's greatest hits. Take The Mists of Avalon, a 1983 novel by Marion Zimmer Bradley that reimagines the Arthurian legends with Druids as central figures. Here, they are mystical guides, weaving spells and prophecies in a mist-laden world. The book sold like hotcakes, because who doesn't love a good dose of myth and magic with their history? This portrayal of Druids as mystical powerhouses has stuck in our cultural consciousness, despite the historical Druids being more about brain power than actual magic. But literature is just the tip of the iceberg. Enter the world of Neo-Druidism, a modern revival that blends ancient beliefs with contemporary spirituality. Neo-Druidism is a bit like spiritual recycling, taking the best bits of ancient practices and giving them a 21st century twist. It's a movement that started in the 18th century and has been gaining steam ever since. Today, it's estimated that there are over 10,000 practitioners worldwide, with groups like the Order of Bards, Ovates, and Druids, Obod, leading the charge. They're not exactly sacrificing livestock under the full moon, but they are engaging in rituals that celebrate nature and honor the changing seasons. The appeal of Neo-Druidism lies in its adaptability. In a world that's increasingly disconnected from nature, the idea of reconnecting with the earth and its cycles is profoundly appealing. Neo-Druids tap into this desire for connection, offering a spiritual path that's less dogma and more do-it-yourself. It's a choose-your-own adventure of spirituality, a far cry from the structured rituals of ancient times, but with enough nods to the past to feel authentic. But while Neo-Druidism might offer comfort and community, it also raises questions about authenticity. Can a modern movement truly claim lineage from a group whose practices were largely undocumented and whose history is shrouded in mystery? It's like trying to recreate a vintage recipe with missing ingredients. You might get something delicious, but it won't be the same dish. Yet, the allure of the Druids persists, precisely because they are a blank canvas onto which we can project our desires for mystery and meaning. So why does the legend of the Druids endure? It's a cocktail of nostalgia, mystery, and the human need for connection. In our fast-paced, tech-driven world, the idea of a simpler time when people lived in tune with the natural world is incredibly seductive. The Druids, with their enigmatic aura and whispered secrets, offer a bridge to that imagined past. And let's not forget the power of myth itself. Myths are like cultural glue, binding us together with shared stories and symbols. The Druids, with their blend of reality and fantasy, represent the enduring human quest for understanding the unknown. In a world where facts are often stranger than fiction, the Druids remind us that sometimes it's the legends that offer the most profound truths. In conclusion, the Druids' legacy is a testament to the power of storytelling and the human imagination. They remind us that history is not just about what happened, but about how we choose to remember it. Romanticized or vilified, the Druids offer a lens through which we can explore the complexities of belief, power, and identity. Their story is one of transformation, from historical figures to cultural icons, a journey that mirrors our own search for meaning in a rapidly changing world. So the next time you encounter a Druid in a book, movie, or spiritual gathering, remember the real magic lies not in the rituals themselves, but in the stories we tell ourselves about them. In the tapestry of history, threads of chaos often weave into unexpected beauty, and the 13th century was no exception. Enter the Mongols, storming across Asia like an over-caffeinated horde on horseback, leaving behind a wake of not just terror and toppled empires, but a peculiar kind of artistic cross-pollination. Here's the kicker. These fearsome warriors, who seemed more at home with a bow and arrow than a paintbrush, inadvertently gave rise to one of the most delicate and intricate art forms known to humanity: Persian miniature painting. Now, you might think of these miniatures as the medieval equivalent of Instagram, minus the hashtags and filters. They were tiny, radiant canvases, capturing the grandeur and myths of Persian culture with all the subtlety of a modern-day influencer's travel post. But let's rewind a bit. We're talking about an art form that didn't just pop up overnight. Its roots stretched deep into the soil of cultural exchange, fertilized by a century of upheaval and transformation. In 1258, Baghdad, a bustling center of learning and culture, fell to the Mongols. This was not exactly a peaceful handover. The destruction was catastrophic, but in this tale of ruin lay the seeds of a new era. The Mongol rulers, particularly Hulagu Khan, Genghis Khan's grandson, were not your average conquerors. They appreciated a good piece of art, and as they settled into Persian lands, they began to patronize local artists. These artists, in turn, absorbed influences from their new overlords, who had brought with them a taste for Chinese art and techniques, specifically the use of paper and the delicate brushwork associated with it. The result? Persian miniature painting blossomed into a distinct style characterized by vibrant colors, intricate designs, and a remarkable attention to detail. These were not your typical wall-hogging masterpieces. No, these paintings were small, often no larger than a modern paperback, but packed with enough narrative power to rival any epic. They adorned manuscripts and books, turning each page into a portal to another world. But let's not get too misty-eyed just yet. Reality check: the Mongol invasion was brutal. Cities were razed, populations decimated. Yet, out of this wreckage, a cultural renaissance emerged, illustrating the paradox of destruction feeding creation. The Persians, ever adaptable, took the Mongols' influence and ran with it, creating something uniquely their own. It was a bit like remix culture today, where sampling leads to groundbreaking new music. Fast forward a few decades, and the Ilkhanid period, 1256 to 35-3, witnessed the full flowering of this art form. The Persian court became a melting pot of artistic talent drawn from across the empire. Artists, often working anonymously, produced miniatures that were as much about storytelling as they were about aesthetics. These weren't just pretty pictures, they were visual narratives, each brushstroke serving a purpose. Imagine a Persian epic like the Shahnameh, the Book of Kings, condensed into a series of vivid, jewel-like scenes, each demanding the viewer's attention and inviting them to lose themselves in the story. And what stories they were! Tales of legendary heroes, mythical creatures, and heavenly battles, all rendered in exquisite detail. These miniatures served an important role in preserving Persian culture and identity in a time of foreign rule and uncertainty. They were a form of resistance, an assertion of cultural pride wrapped in layers of silk and paint. Yet, while the Mongols provided the initial spark, it was the Persian artists who fanned it into a flame. They innovated with vibrant mineral pigments and gold leaf, creating works that were as much about craftsmanship as they were about creativity. The miniatures became a way to showcase technical skill and narrative genius in a space no larger than the palm of your hand. Talk about maximizing impact. Let's pause for a moment to appreciate the economic reality of this art form. These miniatures were not cheap to produce. The materials alone, gold leaf, lapis lazuli, and other precious pigments, were costly. They were the luxury goods of their time, commissioned by the wealthy elite who could afford to splash out on culture. But what a splash they made! These artworks were like the status symbols of the day, a way to signal one's sophistication and cultural cachet. So, what's the takeaway from this chapter in history? For one, it's a reminder that even the most tumultuous times can give birth to unexpected beauty. The Mongol invasion, horrific as it was, set the stage for a cultural transformation that might never have happened otherwise. And in a world where stories were often as valuable as gold, Persian miniature painting became a powerful medium for storytelling, a testament to the resilience and adaptability of Persian culture. These tiny masterpieces remind us that art, much like history, is full of surprises. And sometimes the smallest things can leave the biggest impact. The Mongol invasion, horrific as it was, set the stage for a cultural transformation that might never have happened otherwise. And in a world where stories were often as valuable as gold, Persian miniature painting became a powerful medium for storytelling, a testament to the resilience and adaptability of Persian culture. These tiny masterpieces remind us that art, much like history, is full of surprises. And sometimes the smallest things can leave the biggest impact. Fast forward to the 15th century, and we're diving headfirst into the golden age of Persian miniatures, a period that took the art form from niche to must-have. Think of it as the transition from flip phones to the first iPhone. Suddenly, everyone wanted one. Into the Timurid dynasty, where the art of miniature painting hit a crescendo. The Timurids, named after their founder Timur, who fancied himself a descendant of Genghis Khan because who wouldn't want to claim that dubious honor, were not just conquerors but also cultural connoisseurs. Their court became a veritable art factory, churning out miniatures with the sort of intensity that would make a modern-day tech startup blush. The Timurid rulers, particularly the artsy Shah Rukh and his son Ulugh Beg, were all about the finer things in life. They didn't just bankroll artists, they essentially put them on retainer. This wasn't just a hobby, it was a full-blown obsession. And why not? These miniatures were the ultimate status symbols, the kind of thing that made your peers whip out their own collections just to keep up. Imagine a room full of nobles, each trying to outdo the other, not with flashy cars or designer clothes, but with the most exquisite miniature painting. It was a game of one-upmanship, where the stakes were cultural immortality. Now, let's talk economics. Producing these miniatures was no cheap affair. We're talking about materials like ultramarine, made from lapis lazuli sourced all the way from Afghanistan, the blue gold of the art world. And gold leaf, because why settle for mere paint when you can have your art literally shine? The cost of these materials alone would make a modern art collector do a double take. But for the Timurid elite, the price was worth it. These paintings were not just art, they were investments, cultural capital, that could be passed down through generations. As we move into the 16th century, the Safavid dynasty steps into the limelight, taking the miniature art baton from the Timurids and sprinting into new territories. Under the Safavids, particularly during the reign of Shah Abbas I, the capital city of Isfahan became a cultural hub, a Middle Eastern Renaissance Florence, if you will. The Safavids had a knack for combining the artistic flair of their predecessors with their own unique style, resulting in miniatures that were even more detailed, more vibrant, and, dare we say, even more Instagrammable. Shah Abbas, a ruler with a penchant for grandeur, saw art as a way to consolidate power and project an image of a sophisticated, enlightened empire. It's like he understood the power of a good PR campaign centuries before social media made it a daily concern. And so, he patronized artists like there was no tomorrow, creating a flourishing environment where painters could hone their skills and push the boundaries of the miniature form. These artists, operating under royal patronage, took meticulousness to a whole new level. We're talking about details so fine that artists would use brushes made from a single hair to achieve them. The precision was mind-boggling, a level of dedication that would make even the most committed modern-day influencers' content creation look like a casual hobby. Each miniature was a masterpiece of storytelling, with layers of symbolism and meaning embedded in every corner. But here's a myth-busting nugget for you. While these paintings are often romanticized as the pinnacle of Persian art, they were more than just pretty pictures. They served practical functions too. Manuscripts adorned with miniatures were used as teaching tools, political propaganda, and even diplomatic gifts. They were the multimedia presentations of their time, providing a visually engaging way to convey complex ideas and narratives. Yet, despite their practical uses, there's no denying the allure these miniatures held. They were cultural currency, objects of desire that transcended their aesthetic value. Owning a collection of miniatures was akin to having a private gallery of the most exclusive art, a reflection of one's taste and status. It was the kind of thing that could make or break a noble's reputation. In a world where appearances mattered, these paintings were the ultimate calling card. While the Timurid and Safavid dynasties helped elevate Persian miniatures to legendary status, it's crucial to recognize the individual artists who toiled away, often without fame or recognition. These were the unsung heroes, the virtuosos who brought these tiny canvases to life. Names like Behrzad and Reza Abbasi might not roll off the tongue today, but in their time, they were the rock stars of the art world. Their works were celebrated, imitated, and above all, coveted. Behrzad, for instance, was a master of composition and color, known for his ability to create dynamic, emotionally resonant scenes. His work was so influential that he was appointed director of the Royal Workshop in Herat, essentially making him the Steve Jobs of Persian miniatures. Reza Abbasi, on the other hand, was a bit of a rebel, known for his innovative style and penchant for depicting everyday life. His work marked a departure from the traditional themes of mythology and history, bringing a fresh perspective to the art form. But let's not get too misty-eyed about the artistic utopia. The reality was that many of these artists worked in demanding conditions, with patrons who had little patience for anything less than perfection. Deadlines were tight, and the pressure to produce was immense. It wasn't all leisurely brushstrokes and creative freedom. It was a high-stakes environment where only the best survived. So, what can we take away from this period of artistic flourish? For starters, it's a reminder that art has always been intertwined with power and politics. The Persian miniatures of the Timurid and Safavid dynasties were not just decorative, they were strategic, serving as tools of influence and persuasion. They exemplified how art could be harnessed to shape perceptions and reinforce authority. In the grand tapestry of history, Persian miniatures stand out as gems of cultural resilience and artistic innovation. They remind us that art, much like history itself, is a living, evolving entity capable of reflecting the complexities and contradictions of the human experience. So next time you scroll through a perfectly curated social media feed, spare a thought for those Persian artists who set the stage for visual storytelling centuries before the digital age. And remember, behind every beautiful image lies a story of ambition, skill, and yes, a fair bit of drama. Now let's dive into the nitty-gritty of what really went on behind those exquisite Persian miniatures, where reality is far less glamorous than the art itself. Forget the image of a solitary artistic genius lost in creative reverie. The truth is, those masterpieces were more a product of teamwork than a lone wolf's vision. A bit like the Renaissance equivalent of a Pixar production line, where the credits roll longer than the movie. First up, let's talk materials, because these weren't your dollar store watercolors. The paint palette of a Persian miniaturist was a veritable treasure chest. We're talking about ultramarine, made from lapis lazuli sourced from the Badakhshan mines in Afghanistan. This stuff was so pricey it might as well have been blue kryptonite. A single pound could set you back more than a craftsman's yearly wage. Then there was gold leaf, because who doesn't want their art to literally shimmer? And let's not forget vermilion, a vivid red derived from cinnabar, and malachite, a vibrant green from copper deposits. These pigments weren't just colours, they were status symbols, turning each page into a luxury item. But wait, there's more to the story. These pigments didn't just magically appear in the hands of the artists. No, they had to be meticulously prepared, often by apprentices who ground minerals into powder, mixed them with binders like egg yolk or gum arabic, and tested them for colour fastness. Think of it like a medieval chemistry class, minus the safety goggles, and with a lot more at stake than just a bad grade. The technique, however, was where things got really intricate. The artists used brushes as fine as a single squirrel hair. Yes, you heard that right, squirrel hair. Imagine the precision needed when your brush has fewer bristles than the average teenager's mustache. This was detailed work that demanded a steady hand and a laser focus, the kind of concentration that today would require a gallon of coffee and noise-cancelling headphones. And let's not overlook the paper. Persian paper was a marvel in itself, often imported from China and treated with a starch coating to create a perfect painting surface. This wasn't your average notebook paper. It had to be smooth enough for the finest detail, yet strong enough to withstand the layering of pigments and gold leaf. The preparation of paper was a craft in its own right, with sheets being burnished to a mirror-like finish using agate stones. Now, on to the myth-busting. These miniatures weren't the brainchild of a single artist sitting in solitude, clutching a palette and looking out wistfully at the desert sunset. In reality, creating a miniature was a team effort. The production process resembled an assembly line more than an art studio. There were calligraphers who penned the elegant script, painters who laid down the colours, and illuminators who added those eye-catching gold accents. It was like a medieval artistic relay race, with each craftsperson passing the work along to the next specialist. And let's talk about the workplace conditions, because romantic notions of artistic freedom take a nosedive here. Picture artisans crammed into a workshop more crowded than a Black Friday sale. They worked long hours under the watchful eye of a master artist who was both mentor and taskmaster. Deadlines were tight, and mistakes weren't just frowned upon. They could mean losing your job, or worse, your patron's favour. The pressure was immense, the stakes high. It was less starving artist and more sweatshop chic. Despite the rigorous conditions, these workshops were hives of creativity. Ideas bounced around like a medieval brainstorming session, with artists borrowing techniques and motifs from one another, constantly pushing the boundaries of what could be achieved on such a small scale. It was collaboration at its finest, long before the term became a buzzword in corporate boardrooms. The economic backdrop of this artistic endeavour was as complex as the art itself. Persian miniatures were luxury items, commissioned by the elite who could afford the exorbitant costs. Owning a collection was akin to having the latest tech gadgets today, a signal that you were in the know, culturally and financially. These artworks were investments, and patrons expected a return, not just in aesthetic pleasure, but in social capital. It was a world where art and commerce were inextricably linked, where the brushstrokes of an artist could dictate the rise and fall of reputations. Yet, within this economy of art, there were layers of symbolism and meaning embedded in each miniature, making them more than mere commodities. They were cultural artifacts, capturing the zeitgeist of the Persian world. Each painting was a snapshot of an era, encoding stories, values, and even political messages. They were as much about identity as they were about beauty, serving as a visual chronicle of Persian history and society. So, what does all this tell us about the nature of art and creativity? For one, it's a reminder that behind every legendary work, there's a team of unsung heroes, labouring away in the shadows. It's also a testament to the power of collaboration, to the idea that creativity thrives not in isolation, but in community. These miniatures were the product of a collective vision, a testament to what can be achieved when talent and teamwork come together. As we continue to unravel the tapestry of Persian miniatures, remember that these artworks are more than just pretty pictures. They're a window into a world where art was both a craft and a calling, where the pursuit of beauty was as much about skill as it was about storytelling. So, let's keep our brushes at the ready and our imaginations wide open as we explore the next chapter in the saga of Persian miniature painting. And trust me, there's plenty more drama and intrigue to uncover before we reach the final brushstroke. So, as we dip our toes into the swirling pool of Persian miniature iconography and symbolism, prepare to have your artistic world turned on its head. You see, these aren't just pretty pictures to hang on a wall. No way. They're more like visual riddles wrapped in a mystery inside an enigma, each one begging to be solved by anyone brave enough to peer beneath the paint. To start unravelling this colourful tapestry, let's talk about the colours themselves. You might look at a vibrant blue or a lush green and think, nice shade, but hold your horses, we're diving way deeper than that. Take ultramarine, that dazzling blue derived from lapis lazuli. It wasn't just eye candy, it was a symbol of wealth and power, screaming exclusivity louder than a designer logo. If you saw a lot of blue in a miniature, you better believe the patron was rolling in dough. or at least doing a good job of pretending to. And then there's the gold. Oh, the gold. It wasn't just about flaunting wealth, though there was plenty of that. It was about divine light, celestial realms, and a touch of the supernatural. Gold leaf in a painting was like the ancient world's version of special effects, turning the mundane into the mystical with just a few brushstrokes. It elevated scenes from the earthly to the heavenly, suggesting a connection to the divine that was as much about politics as piety. Because let's face it, aligning oneself with the powers above has never hurt anyone's political agenda. Speaking of politics, these miniatures weren't shy about their allegiances. They were like the political thrillers of their day, with subtle jabs and nods that could make or break reputations. Every detail, from the tilt of a hat to the pattern on a robe, could be loaded with meaning. A hawk depicted in flight? That's not just a bird, that's a symbol of royal authority, a nod to the patron's noble lineage. A lion lounging in the background? That's strength and courage, often associated with the rulers themselves. These weren't just animals, they were avatars of power, metaphors masquerading as wildlife. And let's not forget the human figures. These weren't your average stick figures scrawled in the margins of a notebook. Each person depicted was a carefully crafted symbol, often representing historical figures or mythological heroes. Take the famed Persian epic, the Shahnameh. Its tales were a goldmine for miniaturists, who transformed its legendary heroes into timeless icons. Rustam, the epic's valiant hero, for instance, wasn't just a character, he was the embodiment of strength and virtue, a moral compass painted in vivid hues. His likeness in a miniature wasn't just decorative, it was a reminder of the values and ideals the patron wished to champion, or at least be associated with. But here's where things get really juicy. Not all iconography was about lofty ideals and divine mandates. Some of it was downright subversive. Miniatures could be as much about resistance as reverence. Take a closer look, and you might find subtle critiques of the ruling elite or clever nods to cultural resilience. In an era where dissent wasn't exactly encouraged, art became a covert way to speak truth to power. It was like slipping a protest poster into a gallery exhibition, hiding in plain sight. Now, if you're thinking this sounds like a lot of pressure to put on a piece of paper the size of a modern postcard, you're not wrong. The artists were playing a high-stakes game, where a misplaced brushstroke could have consequences far beyond the canvas. But that's where the genius of these miniatures lies, in their ability to convey complex, multi-layered narratives within such a confined space, turning every inch into a battleground of ideas and ideals. Of course, to truly appreciate these miniatures, you have to consider the audience. These weren't mass-produced posters plastered on every street corner. No, these were exclusive, bespoke creations meant for the eyes of the elite. A Persian miniature was like a private screening of a blockbuster film, with the added twist that the audience was often a part of the story being told. Patrons saw themselves reflected in the art, their identities woven into the fabric of the narrative. It was a chance to see oneself not just as a participant in history, but as a shaper of it. But let's not romanticize this too much. The reality was that these miniatures were also tools of propaganda, selling a carefully curated version of events that benefited those in power. They were the original fake news, crafted with elegance and sophistication. A ruler might commission a miniature depicting a victorious battle, conveniently omitting the less than glorious details. Or a noble might be portrayed as a paragon of virtue, with any less flattering aspects of their character artfully airbrushed away. No Photoshop necessary. So, what's our takeaway in this visual game of chess? It's a reminder that art, much like history, is never neutral. Persian miniatures were not just expressions of individual creativity, they were instruments of influence, wielded by those who understood the power of imagery. They teach us that beneath the surface beauty of art lies a complex web of meaning, where every stroke and shade is a calculated move in the grand game of politics and culture. As we wrap our minds around the intricate world of Persian iconography, remember that every miniature is more than meets the eye. It's a testament to the enduring power of art to inspire, provoke, and challenge, even in the most unexpected ways. So next time you find yourself staring at a seemingly simple scene, look a little closer. You never know what secrets are waiting to be uncovered, hidden in plain sight, just like a Persian miniature. And trust me, the story is far from over. There's plenty more to explore before we reach the final chapter of this artistic saga. And now, as we pivot from the opulent past to the bustling present, let's unravel the legacy of Persian miniatures, those palm-sized powerhouses of storytelling and artistry. These aren't just relics gathering dust in the backrooms of museums. They're vibrant echoes of history still resonating with artists, cultures, and yes, even the modern-day Instagram art scene. The Persian miniature painting tradition, with its roots tangled in the rich soil of history, continues to branch out in fascinating ways, even as we speak. So, let's kick off with a myth-busting nugget right out of the gate. Persian miniatures aren't just about aesthetics. Sure, they look like they were crafted by a meticulous artist who probably had the patience of a saint, but there's more to them than meets the eye. They were, and still are, cultural icons, visual ambassadors of Persian identity and heritage. Their legacy is a testament to the resilience and adaptability of Persian culture, a culture that's been through more ups and downs than a soap opera character. In today's art world, the influence of Persian miniatures is as undeniable as the allure of cat videos on the internet. These works have inspired artists across the globe, from the delicate brushwork of Indian miniatures to the intricate patterns in Ottoman art. Their impact can be seen in the swirling arabesques of Islamic architecture, the vibrant illustrations of South Asian manuscripts, and even in the more modern, abstract compositions of contemporary artists like Shirin Neshat and Shazia Sikandar. These artists draw on the visual language of Persian miniatures, blending traditional themes with modern sensibilities, much like a DJ remixing an old classic to create something fresh and new. The global reach of Persian miniatures is a testament to their timeless appeal. They've become a kind of artistic Esperanto, a universal language that transcends borders and time periods. Just as the Mongols once spread their artistic influences across Asia, the legacy of Persian miniatures now stretches far beyond the borders of Iran, touching the artistic sensibilities of people from Paris to Tokyo. And let's not forget that these miniatures are still being produced today, with contemporary Iranian artists keeping the tradition alive while infusing it with modern themes and techniques. But let's not get too starry-eyed here. While the legacy of Persian miniatures is indeed rich and varied, it's also been subject to a fair amount of myth-making. One persistent myth is that these paintings were solely the domain of male artists. Not so fast. Historical records and recent scholarship reveal that women played a significant role in the creation of miniatures, often working in family workshops or as anonymous contributors to larger projects. It's a reminder that history, much like a Persian miniature, is full of hidden details waiting to be uncovered. Economically speaking, the art of Persian miniatures was a high-stakes game. In their heyday, these paintings were the luxury goods of the elite, much like the high-end watches and designer handbags of today. They were commissioned by wealthy patrons who saw art as a means of asserting their status and influence. The cost of materials alone, think lapis lazuli and gold leaf, meant that only the creme de la creme of society could afford these tiny treasures. Yet, despite their opulence, Persian miniatures were also tools of diplomacy, given as gifts to forge alliances and curry favour. They were the original power ties, worn not around the neck but within the pages of a manuscript. Politically, the miniatures served as propaganda, reinforcing the authority and legitimacy of rulers by depicting them as noble, wise, and divinely favoured. They were the original spin doctors, crafting narratives that flattered their patrons and promoted their agendas. And while they were certainly beautiful, they were also strategic, carefully curated images that told a specific story tailored to the patron's needs. But let's not forget the artists themselves, those unsung heroes who toiled away in workshops, bringing these masterpieces to life. While names like Behzad and Reza Abbasi have become synonymous with Persian miniature painting, countless other artists worked in anonymity, their contributions lost to history. These were the artisans who turned pigments into poetry, who transformed simple brushstrokes into complex narratives. They were the creative engines behind the art form, constantly innovating and refining their techniques to push the boundaries of what could be achieved on such a small scale. So, what can we take away from the legacy of Persian miniatures? For starters, it's a reminder that art is never just about aesthetics. It's a reflection of the society that produces it, a mirror held up to the cultural, political, and economic forces of the time. Persian miniatures are more than just pretty pictures. They're historical documents, visual narratives that capture the spirit of an era. And while the world has changed dramatically since the heyday of Persian miniatures, the art form continues to captivate and inspire. It's a testament to the power of storytelling, to the idea that even the smallest canvas can hold the grandest of ideas. These miniatures remind us that art is a living, evolving entity, capable of transcending time and space to speak to us across the ages. So the next time you find yourself scrolling through a digital gallery or wandering the halls of a museum, take a moment to appreciate the legacy of Persian miniatures. Remember the stories they tell, the cultures they represent, and the artists who brought them to life. Because in the grand tapestry of history, these tiny paintings are a testament to the enduring power of art to connect, inspire, and transform. And in a world that often feels chaotic and uncertain, that's a legacy worth celebrating. Let's dive into the medieval world where, believe it or not, having a pet bird was the ultimate status symbol. Forget Ferraris and designer handbags. Back then, it was all about owning a falcon. This wasn't just any pastime. Falconry was the medieval equivalent of an Instagram account with a blue check mark. But how did this feathered fashion statement take flight in Europe? Well, the roots of falconry stretch far beyond the castles and moats of medieval Europe. We're talking ancient Persia, around 2000 BCE, where falconry was already a thing long before anyone was jousting in plate armor. Back in ancient Persia, falconry wasn't just for kicks, it was a serious business. These birds were trained to hunt, providing a reliable source of food. Fast forward to medieval Europe, and falconry had morphed into something much more than a survival tool. It became a badge of nobility, a sign that you had made it in the social hierarchy. If you were strutting around with a falcon perched on your arm, you were basically saying, "I'm important and I know it." This wasn't a hobby for the peasants. Training and maintaining these birds was expensive, requiring time, money, and a little bit of patience. The medieval elite poured resources into falconry like modern billionaires invest in space travel. One of the great champions of falconry was Frederick II of Hohenstaufen, Holy Roman Emperor, and all-around Renaissance man, centuries before the actual Renaissance. Frederick was the kind of guy who took falconry to the next level. He wasn't content with just owning a falcon. He wanted to understand every tiny detail of the sport. He became so obsessed that he wrote De arte venandi cum avibus, the art of hunting with birds, a 13th century manifesto on falconry that could easily pass for an early version of Falconry for Dummies. This wasn't just a pamphlet, it was a 6-volume epic that covered everything from bird anatomy to training techniques. Frederick's work laid the groundwork for falconry as we understand it today. Now, you might be wondering why falconry became such a hit among the medieval elite. The answer is a cocktail of social, political, and economic factors. For starters, falcons were the perfect icebreaker at medieval gatherings. Think of them as the original conversation starter. "Oh, you have your falcon? Well, I just imported a Seika falcon from the Middle East." Falcons were also a great way to network. Nobles would gather for hunts, discussing treaties and alliances while their birds soared overhead, doing all the hard work. It was like LinkedIn, but with more feathers and fewer awkward endorsements. But let's not get too caught up in the romance of it all. The reality of medieval falconry was far from glamorous. Training a falcon was no walk in the park. It required a falconer to spend countless hours getting to know their bird, understanding its quirks and moods. It was a relationship built on trust, not unlike handling a moody teenager. And let's not forget the practicalities. Falcons needed feeding, housing, and medical care. Keeping a falcon was akin to running a small petting zoo with a very specialized clientele. The economic implications were enormous. Falcons were traded across vast distances, with the most prized birds being imported from the Middle East at great expense. This wasn't just a case of walking down to the local market and picking up a bird. It involved complex trade routes and negotiations, with prices that could rival a small kingdom's ransom. The cost of owning a falcon was a clear indicator of wealth, much like the price tags on modern sports cars. Politically, falconry played a role in diplomacy. Birds were gifted between monarchs as a sign of goodwill or as part of treaty negotiations. A well-trained falcon could smooth over a multitude of political faux pas, acting as a feathered olive branch in times of strife. In this way, falconry was more than just a pastime, it was part of the political fabric of the time. Of course, as with any status symbol, myths and legends grew around falconry. Stories of falcons with supernatural abilities or birds that could turn the tide of battle were common, adding an air of mystique to the sport. These tales only served to heighten the allure of falconry, embedding it deeper into the medieval psyche. The truth, however, was often less enchanting. Training birds of prey involved a lot of trial and error, with falconers learning from their mistakes. This wasn't the stuff of fairy tales. It was hard work, requiring dedication and skill. For every triumphant hunt, there were plenty of days when the falcon simply refused to cooperate, flying off into the sunset and leaving its handler red-faced in front of the nobility. In conclusion, the origins of falconry in medieval Europe are a mix of ancient traditions, social ambition, and a touch of political intrigue. It was a sport that bridged cultures, influenced economies, and played a role in the power dynamics of the age. Frederick II's scholarly approach to falconry was emblematic of the period's fascination with the natural world and the desire to master it. So next time you see a falcon, remember, it's not just a bird, it's a window into a bygone era of knights, nobles, and a whole lot of feathered prestige. While falconry may sound like an idyllic medieval pastime, it was more like owning a vintage car collection with a ravenous appetite for cash. Let's dive into the brutal economics of it all. First up, the gyr-falcon, the medieval equivalent of driving a Bugatti. This bird wasn't just a casual purchase. The price tag for a single gyr-falcon could easily soar to 1,000 livres tournois, a figure that would make any medieval accountant break out in a cold sweat. To put that into perspective, a skilled craftsman at the time might earn around 5 livres a year, meaning a gyr-falcon cost more than your average Joe could earn in several lifetimes. We're talking about a bird that literally ate through a commoner's yearly salary for breakfast, and then some. And it wasn't just the initial purchase that drained the coffers. The upkeep of these feathered aristocrats was a full-time job. Every falcon needed its own handler, because, heaven forbid, a noble would stoop to feeding their own bird. Enter the falconer, the unsung hero of the Middle Ages. These folks were on the clock, 24/7, ensuring that the bird was trained, fed, and ready to perform at a moment's notice. The daily grind of a falconer involved a routine that could rival any modern-day CEO's schedule. These handlers would rise with the sun, ready to start a day filled with meticulous care and endless patience. A falconer's toolkit was as specialized as it was essential. Gloves, hoods, creances, that's a fancy word for a training leash, and lures were all part of the standard kit. And don't forget the food. Falcons weren't exactly scavenging for scraps. They required a diet of fresh meat, which often included quail or rabbit. This wasn't your run-of-the-mill feed, and it certainly wasn't cheap. The cost of feeding one of these birds was akin to catering a small banquet every day. Now, let's talk about the apprenticeship required to become a falconer. This wasn't a career you stumbled into after a weekend workshop. The training took years, sometimes decades, and was often passed down through generations. Young apprentices would learn from seasoned masters, absorbing knowledge that was as intricate as it was invaluable. It was a demanding life, filled with the kind of dedication that would make a Zen monk look like a slacker. But why, you ask, would anyone go through so much trouble for a bird? Simple: clout. Owning a falcon wasn't just about the thrill of the hunt. It was a status symbol, a way to announce to the world that you were part of the elite. These birds were like living, breathing social media accounts, broadcasting your wealth and power to anyone within a 100-mile radius. Monarchs and nobles would gift each other falcons to cement alliances, a gesture that said, "We're on the same team," in a language that transcended borders and cultures. Of course, when you're dealing with such high stakes, there had to be rules. Falconry was governed by a strict hierarchy that mirrored the feudal system itself. Not everyone could just waltz into a forest with a falcon on their arm. Oh no, there were laws about which classes could own which birds. A king might fly a gyr-falcon, while a mere knight would be lucky to have a kestrel. It was all about maintaining social order, ensuring that the riffraff knew their place in the grand pecking order. But let's not get too misty-eyed about the romantic notion of falconry as a noble pursuit. The harsh reality was that these birds were sometimes more trouble than they were worth. For every successful hunt, there were countless failures. Falcons were moody creatures, with minds of their own. They might decide to take a little holiday mid-hunt, leaving their handler to awkwardly explain the situation to an impatient lord. And then there were the accidents. a falcon could easily injure itself, leading to costly veterinary care. Or worse, it could perish, taking the noble's investment and prestige down with it. In essence, falconry was a microcosm of medieval life, glamorous from a distance but fraught with challenges up close. It was a world where status and skill went hand in hand, where the line between success and failure was as thin as a falcon's feather. It wasn't just about catching prey, it was about maintaining an image, playing a role in a society that valued appearances almost as much as results. So, the next time you hear about medieval falconry, remember the blood, sweat, and feathers that went into keeping those birds of prey aloft. This was no mere hobby, it was a lifestyle, with all the drama and demands that entailed. And while it may have been a ticket to the upper echelons of society, it came with a cost that was both literal and metaphorical. Stay tuned, because there's more to uncover in the flight path of these fascinating creatures. So, let's get our talons into the nitty-gritty of medieval falconry training, where the day-to-day realities were less about elegance and more about elbow grease. Imagine this. Before dawn even thinks about cracking, a medieval falconer is already up and at 'em, like today's ambitious early risers who swear by their 4 a.m. yoga sessions. But instead of downward dogs, these folks were wrangling raptors. First order of business? The morning checkup. Falcons weren't just perched on a golden gauntlet looking pretty, they needed thorough inspections. Everything from feather condition to foot health was scrutinized more intensely than a reality show audition. Any sign of illness or injury could render a bird useless, or worse, dead. And let's face it, a dead falcon doesn't exactly scream success at the next noble gathering. Then came the feeding, which was less about popping open a bag of kibble and more akin to preparing a gourmet meal. Falcons dined on fresh meat like quail or rabbit, because only the best for these high-flying aristocrats. But feeding wasn't just about nutrition, it was a strategic exercise. Too much and the bird becomes lethargic, too little and it's hangry. The medieval falconer had to strike the perfect balance, a bit like trying to get a toddler to eat their veggies. Now, let's talk training, a process that could make even the most patient modern pet trainer throw in the towel. The falcons weren't exactly born knowing how to dive bomb a pheasant on command. Training involved a mix of conditioning and encouragement, often utilizing a lure, which was a fancy way of saying a stuffed animal on a string. The falconer would swing this around, teaching the falcon to associate the lure with a tasty reward, kind of like Pavlov's dogs, but with more feathers and fewer bells. But wait, it gets better. Some training methods were downright bizarre. Enter the practice of manning, where falconers would spend hours, sometimes days, just sitting with the bird, getting it accustomed to human presence. Imagine trying to build rapport with a creature that has the social skills of a moody teenager. This required patience that would make a Zen master look like a caffeine addict. And here's a fun fact. Falcons had their own version of flight school, called weathering. This involved tethering the bird outside to get it used to the elements. It was crucial for toughening up the falcon, ensuring it wouldn't wimp out the first time it faced a stiff breeze. This was no spa day, more like a boot camp for birds. Now, you might be picturing this idyllic scene of falconer and falcon bonding under a pastel sunrise. Let's burst that bubble. Training was fraught with challenges. Falcons, true to their wild nature, didn't always play ball. They could fly off mid-session, leaving the falconer to explain to their lord why their prized bird was now a dot on the horizon. Imagine the medieval equivalent of your dog running off with the neighbour's steak, except this steak cost more than a year's rent. And let's not forget the social aspect. Falconry wasn't just a one-on-one with the bird, it was a performance art. The falconer had an audience, lords, ladies, and anyone else looking to be entertained. A successful hunt could elevate a falconer's status, while a failure could see them sent back to the stables, tail between their legs. Talk about pressure. But why go through all this hassle? Simple prestige. A well-trained falcon was the medieval equivalent of a luxury yacht, impressive, expensive, and a testament to one's social standing. Lords and ladies would flaunt their falcons at hunts like modern influencers, flaunt their latest designer haul. Owning a bird wasn't just about the thrill of the chase, it was about flaunting wealth and status. So, were these falcons in it for the glory? Probably not. Let's be real. They were likely more interested in the steady supply of mice than the occasional rabbit. The falcons were the original divas, doing what they pleased, when they pleased, with the falconers at their beck and call. But hey, when the stakes are this high, a little diva behaviour might just be worth it. And so, we find that the world of medieval falconry was a complex dance of skill, patience, and a touch of insanity. It was a realm where social aspiration met natural instinct, and where the line between success and failure could be as fine as a falcon's feather. While the myths paint a picture of a romantic partnership between man and bird, the truth was often messier, filled with trial, error, and a hefty dose of perseverance. Stay tuned as we continue to unravel the flight path of this fascinating practice, because trust me, there's more than meets the eye in the world of these feathered nobles. So, while falconry might have looked like a medieval Instagram story complete with ornate gloves and birds posing like influencers, the reality was often more about managing chaos than enjoying a seamless photo op. But hey, let's not get too bogged down in the nitty-gritty. There's a bigger picture to explore, falconry's political and social significance. In the medieval power playbook, falcons were like the ultimate diplomatic gift basket. Forget sending flowers or fruit. A falcon was the go-to gesture for kings and emperors looking to butter up their peers. When a ruler received a falcon, it wasn't just a pet. It was a message wrapped in feathers. Picture this. King X sends a gyre falcon to King Y. It wasn't just a bird. It was a feathered white flag, a declaration of peace, or at least an opening bid. These birds were symbols of sovereignty, each one a winged emissary flying the banner of goodwill. Take the case of Richard the Lionheart and Saladin. During the Third Crusade, Richard, the English king, and Saladin, the Sultan of Egypt and Syria, were technically enemies. Yet, even amidst the clashing swords and sieges, they swapped gifts, including falcons. It was diplomacy at its finest, or perhaps its most feathered. Such exchanges were the medieval equivalent of high-stakes poker, where the chips were live birds of prey. And just like poker, the stakes were high. A poorly chosen or mishandled gift could ruffle more than just feathers. But the political falconry circus wasn't all majestic flights and diplomatic dances. It was also about flaunting power, and like all good power displays, it sometimes got messy. A king might receive a falcon as a gift, only to find that it wasn't quite the noble hunter it was cracked up to be. Imagine the awkwardness of presenting a falcon that prefers sunbathing to hunting, turning a diplomatic gesture into a royal embarrassment. Nothing says, oops, like a falcon that refuses to leave its perch at the critical moment. Beyond diplomacy, falconry was woven into the social fabric of medieval life. It was the ultimate status symbol, a marker of one's position in the pecking order. And like any good social marker, there were rules, strict ones. The type of falcon you could own was dictated by social rank. Royals and nobles might flaunt gyre falcons, the avian aristocrats, while the lower nobility and gentry had to settle for, say, peregrine falcons or goshawks. Heaven forbid a mere merchant tried to soar above their station with a bird meant for a duke. But let's not romanticize this feathered hierarchy too much. The reality was far more complex and, at times, downright laughable. Imagine a lord, puffed up with pride, parading his prized falcon, only for the bird to have an off day, deciding it would rather explore the neighbouring village than catch dinner. Such mishaps were a reminder that, despite the grandeur on display, falcons remained wild creatures at heart, often as unpredictable as the politics they were caught up in. Speaking of politics, falconry was more than just a pastime. It was a tool for forging alliances. Just as today's politicians might negotiate over dinner, medieval power brokers did so over hunting expeditions. Sitting astride horses, falcons perched on their gloves, nobles would discuss treaties, marriages, and territorial claims. It was networking with nobility and nature intertwined, where the success of a hunt could mirror the success of negotiations. But let's not kid ourselves. This wasn't always smooth sailing. Falcons had a knack for injecting a bit of unpredictability into the proceedings, often swooping in or out at the most inopportune times. And then there's the economic angle. Falcons were expensive, as we've established, but they were also an investment. Much like today's tech stocks, a good falcon could yield returns beyond its initial price tag. Monarchs might loan out falcons as a kind of medieval rental service, allowing others to experience the prestige of falconry without the long-term commitment. It was a win-win, provided the falcon didn't decide to fly the coop halfway through the lease. Despite the mythos of falconry as a seamless blend of man and bird, the truth was more tangled. The falconry scene was rife with drama, from political gaffes to social faux pas. Yet, amid the chaos, there was a genuine connection between humans and these majestic creatures. It was a relationship built on trust, patience, and a fair bit of luck. While the falcon might not have cared about the politics of the day, its role as a symbol of power and prestige was undeniable. In the grand tapestry of medieval life, falconry was a vibrant thread, one that connected sovereigns and subjects, hunters and hunted. It was a pastime that transcended borders, a shared language in a world divided by geography and politics. And while the falcon may have been the star, it was the falconers who kept the show running, their skill and dedication ensuring that these feathered ambassadors stayed aloft. So, as we continue to unravel the story of medieval falconry, remember this: behind every great bird was a team of humans juggling politics, prestige, and the occasional pile of bird poop. It's a tale that's far from over, with twists and turns yet to come. Stay tuned, because the flight path of these feathered nobles is as fascinating as it is complicated. And now, as our feathered tale reaches its final chapter, let's take a moment to look at how the legacy of medieval falconry still flutters through our modern world. Despite the fact that most of us would be hard-pressed to keep a cactus alive, falconry continues to symbolize luxury, status, and a touch of the mystical. So, what keeps this ancient practice soaring in our collective consciousness? First off, the romance of falconry is undeniable. Owning a falcon is like having the ultimate vintage collectible, except instead of gathering dust, it's ready to swoop down and catch dinner. It's the allure of controlling nature, of turning wild power into a personal emblem of prestige. This fascination with falconry's mystique has persisted even as the world has drastically changed. Today, falconry is recognized as a UNESCO intangible cultural heritage, a testament to its enduring grip on human imagination. While only about 5,000 falconers are actively practicing in the United States, the sport maintains a cult-like following, with enthusiasts willing to commit time, money, and patience to keep the tradition alive. Economically speaking, falconry has always been a costly endeavor, but modern twists have turned it into an industry of its own. Birds of prey, especially those used in falconry, can cost a pretty penny. A well-trained peregrine falcon can fetch anywhere from 1,000 to 10,000, depending on its lineage and training. And let's not even get started on the rarer species, like the gyfalcon, which, true to its medieval reputation, remains a status symbol with prices that can breach the 50,000 mark. It's like the purebred racehorses of the sky, and for those with deep pockets, these birds are the ultimate feathered investment. Of course, falconry's appeal isn't just about the birds themselves, it's about the experience. Modern falconers aren't just hunters, they're conservationists, historians, and storytellers. They preserve ancient techniques in an age where technology has replaced so much of what was once manual. The art of falconry requires dedication akin to mastering a musical instrument or becoming fluent in a new language. It's a commitment to an age-old dance between human and nature, a partnership that demands respect and understanding. And that, dear friends, is a currency that never goes out of style. But let's not romanticize it too much. The reality is that falconry today, much like in medieval times, involves a lot of hard work and not a little chaos. Training a bird of prey is still a labor-intensive process, requiring daily conditioning, a keen understanding of avian psychology, and a willingness to accept that your prized falcon might have other plans, like joining a seagull beach party instead of coming back to your glove. It's a relationship that's as much about mutual respect as it is about control, a delicate balance that's easy to admire from afar but challenging to maintain up close. Politically, falconry has taken on new roles as well, albeit less about forging alliances and more about environmental stewardship. Birds of prey are vital to ecosystems, controlling rodent populations and serving as indicators of ecological health. In some regions, falconry helps reintroduce endangered species, blending conservation efforts with traditional practices. It's a far cry from the diplomatic gifts of old, but in an era where the environment is at the forefront of global discourse, falconry has found a new purpose. Socially, falconry still holds a certain allure. Just as medieval nobles flaunted their birds to assert their status, modern falconers often share their passion through social media, bringing the age-old practice to a digital audience. Instagram and TikTok are filled with videos of majestic birds soaring through the sky, their handlers showcasing a lifestyle that marries ancient techniques with contemporary living. It's a reminder that, despite the centuries, the fascination with falconry remains timeless. Yet for all its modern-day glamour, the core of falconry remains the same as it ever was, a testament to human curiosity and our desire to connect with the natural world. In medieval times, falconry was a way to demonstrate power and prestige. Today, it's a bridge between past and present, a living history that offers a glimpse into a world where falcons were more than just birds. They were symbols, partners, and sometimes the only creatures that truly understood the complexities of their handlers. So, as we conclude our journey through the skies of medieval falconry, remember that behind every soaring falcon is a wealth of history, a legacy of human endeavour, and a testament to our unending quest to understand and harness the wild. It's a story that continues to unfold, much like the flight of these magnificent birds, unpredictable, awe-inspiring, and always, always captivating.